Something extraordinary is happening right now, and most people have absolutely no idea. As of 2024, global debt has surpassed 3 to 15 trillion. That is not a typo. 315 trillion. We are standing at the absolute precipice of a monumental, irreversible shift in how global wealth is stored, transferred, and ultimately destroyed. Are you prepared for what is coming? When you look around, the signs of a catastrophic financial realignment are everywhere. Yet the mainstream narrative continues to desperately feed you a steady diet of complacency and manipulated statistics. This is not a time for blind arrogance. It is a time for deep analytical observation and immediate action. The historical trajectory of currency debasement has reached a fever pitch driven entirely by reckless government spending and exorbitant unpayable borrowing. Your hard-earned purchasing power is being systematically drained day by day, and if you do not desperately seek to understand the underlying mechanisms at play, your entire life savings could simply evaporate into nothingness. Stay with me, because what I am about to reveal is deeply chilling, historically proven, and completely undeniable. We are currently witnessing the final volatile phases of a generational wealth transfer, and the window to protect yourself and your family is closing significantly faster than anyone realizes. To truly grasp the terrifying magnitude of this unshakable reality, we must look backward, because history is not merely a series of random, disconnected events. It is a meticulously structured cycle, a distinct pattern of predictable behaviors that every major superpower inevitably follows. I call this the four-stage system of wealth transfer and imperial decline, a framework that explains exactly where we are today. Stage 1 is the foundation of prosperity, where a nation produces significantly more than it consumes, builds robust, dominant trade networks, and establishes a currency backed by tangible, hard value, thereby earning the unwavering trust of the entire world. Stage 2 brings rapid, unprecedented expansion and the exorbitant privilege of officially becoming the global reserve currency. The nation becomes the undisputed financial epicenter of the globe, but slowly, imperceptibly, arrogance begins to take root in the minds of its leaders. Stage 3 is the critical tipping point, characterized by overextending military reach across the globe, chronic and compounding trade deficits, and the dangerous, intoxicating delusion that true wealth can simply be printed rather than actually produced. This is precisely where the fiat illusion takes over, and inflated nominal terms temporarily mask the underlying catastrophic economic decay. Finally, stage 4 is the absolute unraveling, marked by severe internal conflict, massive and uncontrollable currency debasement, a total loss of international faith, and the ultimate humiliating collapse of the currency's reserve status, leading inevitably to a frantic, desperate flight to hard assets by those who see the writing on the wall. This cycle is completely undeniable. It is a mathematical certainty driven by fundamental human nature and the unshakable laws of economic physics. Are you ready to see exactly how this precise pattern has played out perfectly across centuries of human history? Check verified, undeniable. Consider the mighty Roman Empire, a sprawling civilization that once held absolute, unquestioned dominion over the entirety of the known world. In its early, prosperous days, Rome embodied Stage 1 and Stage 2 perfectly. Their vast economic might was built on relentless conquest, expansive trade networks, and a highly trusted currency, the silver denarius, that was practically pure, unadulterated silver. The entire world trusted the Roman coin because it represented true physical purchasing power. But as the immense empire expanded further and further, so did its exorbitant crushing costs. Maintaining a massive standing army across multiple continents and simultaneously funding generous, unsustainable social programs back home required substantially more wealth than the empire could legitimately produce. Rome had officially entered Stage 3, Instead of making the difficult decision to cut reckless expenses, desperate emperors began systematically debasing the currency, secretly mixing cheaper, worthless base metals with the precious silver to mint millions more coins. This deceitful practice was the ancient equivalent of printing unbacked fiat money completely out of thin air. At first, the average citizens did not notice the gradual, insidious dilution, but soon enough, massive inflation exploded across the empire. Prices skyrocketed uncontrollably, and the true purchasing power of the denarius began to evaporate rapidly. The immense arrogance of the Roman elite completely blinded them to the irreversible, catastrophic damage they were causing to the very foundation of their once great economy. By the time Rome finally reached the dreaded stage 4, the denarius was almost entirely devoid of actual silver, essentially worthless in nominal terms and completely rejected by foreign merchants who demanded real value. The empire ultimately collapsed under the crushing, unavoidable weight of its own immense debts and internal decay, permanently dethroned by its sheer inability to maintain a sound, honest currency. The accumulated wealth of the Roman citizens was completely wiped out, brutally transferred to those who possessed the foresight to hold tangible, hard assets like productive land and physical gold. This was not some fringe theory or paranoid delusion. It was a brutal, well-documented historical reality. Check verified, undeniable. Centuries later, the Dutch Republic miraculously emerged as the new, undisputed financial superpower of the world, unknowingly entering the exact same inescapable four-stage cycle. During the 17th century, the legendary Dutch Golden Age was turbocharged by unprecedented, brilliant innovation in global finance and international trade. Through the mighty globe-spanning Dutch East India Company, they utterly dominated global commerce, officially establishing the Dutch guilder as the unshakable, universally accepted global reserve currency. The entire financial world flocked eagerly to Amsterdam, the new financial capital, because the guilder was strictly backed by vast, verifiable reserves of precious metals and a pristine reputation for absolute, unwavering reliability. They were firmly entrenched in stage 1 and 2, reaping the massive, compounding rewards of their strict economic discipline. But overwhelming prosperity soon bred deep complacency, and eventually the Dutch found themselves heavily embroiled in incredibly costly, protracted wars with ambitious rival powers. The immense financial strain of constantly overextending their military forces and desperately defending their sprawling, vulnerable trade empire pushed them directly into stage 3. To secretly finance these exorbitant mounting debts, the Bank of Amsterdam quietly began issuing far more paper receipts for gold and silver than they actually held securely in their physical vaults. This catastrophic, arrogant betrayal of public trust was a reckless, unforgivable debasement of their fiat equivalents. The fragile illusion of endless wealth was successfully maintained for a remarkably short period, but eventually the dark truth leaked out into the public sphere. When terrified depositors suddenly realized the massive vaults were practically empty, sheer panic ensued instantly. The resulting catastrophic bank run completely and utterly shattered all international confidence in the Dutch financial system. The Dutch Republic entered stage 4 violently and rapidly. The once trusted guilder immediately lost its coveted reserve status. The domestic economy imploded spectacularly, and the once mighty Dutch Empire was permanently dethroned from its position of global supremacy. Those unfortunate souls who blindly trusted the corrupt system watched in horror as their generational wealth completely evaporate, while the smart money, those who recognized the shifting cycle, protected themselves by fleeing into tangible assets. Check verified, undeniable. The immense global wealth and geopolitical power then shifted directly across the Channel to the rapidly rising British Empire, which eagerly took up the heavy mantle and immediately began its own predictable journey through the exact same 4 stages. Powered by the unstoppable engine of the Industrial Revolution and an absolutely unmatched, dominant naval fleet, Britain successfully built an expansive empire upon which the sun literally never set. The British pound sterling quickly became the supreme, unquestioned global reserve currency, strictly backed by a rigid, unwavering adherence to the classical gold standard. During the prosperous years of Stage 1 and 2, London was the undisputed beating heart of global finance, and the mighty pound was universally synonymous with unshakable, rock-solid stability. However, the immense compounding cost of relentlessly maintaining a sprawling global empire eventually took its heavy toll on the British Treasury. Two devastating, incredibly expensive world wars drastically accelerated Britain's rapid descent into the dangerous territory of Stage 3. To desperately fund the catastrophic, unimaginable costs of global conflict, Britain was ultimately forced to completely abandon the gold standard, frantically printing massive amounts of unbacked fiat currency and recklessly accumulating crushing, unprecedented levels of national debt. The deeply ingrained arrogance of the British political establishment led them to foolishly believe that the pound's global supremacy was eternal and unassailable, but the cold, hard economic reality was deeply chilling. Their national debt to GDP ratio vaulted aggressively to entirely unsustainable heights, and the actual purchasing power of the pound began to bleed out uncontrollably. By the mid-20th century, a battered Britain had officially reached the devastating reality of Stage 4. They could simply no longer honor their massive international debts in physical gold, and global trust in their financial integrity completely evaporated. The pound sterling was systematically dethroned by the international community, plunging the domestic British economy into a miserable, prolonged period of severe austerity, rampant inflation, and undeniable geopolitical decline. The resulting wealth transfer was brutally efficient and entirely irreversible, completely devastating those oblivious citizens who had utterly failed to read the glaring historical writing on the wall. Check verified undeniable. This deeply entrenched historical pattern brings us directly to the most critical, consequential chapter of our entire story: the meteoric rise of the United States of America and the global dominance of the US dollar. Emerging completely victorious and economically intact from the ashes of World War II, America physically held the vast, overwhelming majority of the entire world's gold reserves. At the historic Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, the US dollar was officially and unanimously crowned as the new global reserve currency, strictly pegged to physical gold, while virtually all other global currencies were subsequently pegged directly to the dollar. America was firmly positioned in the golden, prosperous era of Stage 1 and 2, consistently producing massive trade surpluses, aggressively exporting manufactured goods to the entire world, and enjoying an absolutely unmatched, rapidly rising standard of living. The US dollar was literally as good as gold. But precisely like Rome, the Dutch, and the British before them, the intoxicating arrogance of absolute global power slowly began to corrupt the underlying financial system. The exorbitant, unfunded costs of the protracted Vietnam War and the massive, rapid expansion of domestic social entitlement programs pushed the United States dangerously and recklessly into the perilous territory of Stage 3. In 1971, entirely unable to meet the surging, relentless global demands for physical gold redemptions, President Richard Nixon completely shocked the financial world by temporarily suspending the direct convertibility of the US dollar into gold. Naturally, that supposedly temporary emergency measure quickly became an irreversible, permanent, and catastrophic reality. Overnight, the US dollar became a pure, unbacked fiat currency, completely disconnected from any tangible physical asset. To desperately maintain their fading global hegemony, the U.S. brilliantly brokered the ingenious petrodollar system, effectively ensuring that all global oil trade was mandated to be conducted exclusively in U.S. dollars, thereby artificially creating an unshakable, massive global demand for their rapidly debasing paper currency. For several decades, this highly effective artificial system allowed the United States government to print money relentlessly and without consequence, effectively exporting their domestic inflation to the rest of the developing world and artificially inflating their own standard of living in purely nominal terms. But this deeply reckless, arrogant overextending could not possibly last forever without severe mathematical consequences. We have literally spent the last 50 years desperately and frantically trying to delay the absolute inevitable consequences of remaining in stage 3. Many heavily indoctrinated people suffer from the incredibly dangerous delusion that America is somehow magically different, that our massive military might and our unparalleled technological supremacy miraculously make us entirely immune to the cold, unforgiving historical laws of economic physics. This foolish mindset is pure, unadulterated paranoia mixed heavily with blinding imperial arrogance. The chilling truth is that the fundamental underlying mathematics of our current national debt are absolutely catastrophic. The U.S. debt to GDP ratio has violently vaulted completely past the mathematical point of no return, and the compounding interest payments alone on this massive, suffocating debt burden are now rapidly exceeding the entire massive national defense budget. We are hopelessly trapped in a vicious, inescapable cycle of rapid currency debasement, where the absolute only mathematical solution available to service our exorbitant, unpayable liabilities is to aggressively print trillions more unbacked dollars, thereby further destroying the real purchasing power of every single dollar you currently hold in your bank account. The mainstream media constantly and predictably dismisses these completely valid concerns as crazy fringe theories, but the quiet, deliberate actions of the smart money tell a very different, deeply chilling story. If you want absolute, undeniable proof that the massive global wealth shift has already started, you need to look no further than the monumental, unprecedented geopolitical events of 2022. When the United States and its closest Western allies made the unprecedented decision to completely freeze hundreds of billions of dollars in Russian sovereign reserves, they permanently crossed the Rubicon of global finance. That single, deeply reckless action instantly weaponized the global reserve currency in a catastrophic way that had absolutely never been done before, instantly and clearly signaling to every single central bank on the face of the earth that their supposedly safe dollar reserves were actually no longer safe at all. This monumental blunder was the precise, undeniable catalyst that forcefully shoved the United States violently to the very edge of stage 4. Almost overnight, sovereign countries around the entire world rapidly accelerated their aggressive efforts to completely de-dollarize, desperately and frantically seeking alternative mechanisms to bypass the U.S.-dominated, highly weaponized financial system. Global central banks immediately began aggressively buying physical gold at a completely record-breaking historic pace, quietly dumping massive amounts of long-duration bonds and fundamentally restructuring their foreign exchange reserves to proactively protect themselves from the absolute inevitable collapse of the dollar's long-standing global hegemony. This is absolutely not a drill. This is the quiet, methodical panic of the global elite fiercely scrambling to permanently secure their massive wealth before the fragile fiat system finally implodes upon itself. The foundational petrodollar agreement has effectively been casually allowed to expire without renewal, and bilateral international trade conducted entirely outside the traditional dollar system is currently skyrocketing at an unprecedented exponential rate. We are currently standing at the exact terrifying precipice where the immense wealth of nations is completely and violently realigned. The historical transition from stage 3 directly into stage 4 is absolutely never a smooth process. It is inherently violent, deeply chaotic, and totally financially devastating for the completely unprepared, oblivious majority. Your personal savings, your carefully planned retirement accounts, and your entire future standard of living are currently entirely dependent on a fragile fiat currency that is being systematically, intentionally destroyed by the very same governmental institutions that are explicitly sworn to protect it. You absolutely cannot afford to naively rely on blind hope, and you certainly cannot afford to patiently wait for the incompetent government to magically save you, because they are the exact architects of this unfolding catastrophic crisis. The monumental global wealth shift is absolutely not going to happen in the distant, unforeseen future. It is happening right now, actively in real time, right before your very eyes. You must deeply understand the underlying mechanism right now, today. You still have a brief window of time to position yourself thoughtfully and strategically, but you absolutely do not have infinite time to delay this critical decision. The small window of opportunity to actively protect your family and permanently secure your financial future is closing rapidly and definitively. Historically speaking, those rare individuals who successfully survive and actually thrive during these massive turbulent generational shifts are the ones who proactively move their accumulated wealth out of rapidly debasing, purely fiat currencies and incredibly overvalued risky paper assets, and directly into tangible, real, hard assets that absolutely cannot be magically printed or maliciously manipulated by desperate, cornered central bankers. Physical gold, pure silver, highly scarce commodities, and cash-flowing productive real estate have historically always been the unshakable, reliable lifeboats during terrifying times of sudden imperial decline and massive currency collapse. You need to immediately and critically evaluate every single investment you currently hold in your portfolio. Are you currently dangerously, recklessly exposed to highly vulnerable long-duration bonds? Are you blindly holding far too much of your hard-earned wealth in purely nominal terms that will simply evaporate into thin air as domestic inflation is violently turbocharged in the coming years? Do not let the comfortable, blinding normalcy bias of the past few decades blind you to the stark, chilling reality of the present economic landscape. The monumental global wealth shift has undeniably started, and your ultimate financial survival depends entirely on the specific, decisive actions you choose to take today. Educate yourself relentlessly. Clearly recognize the highly verified, undeniable historical patterns of the past. Fully understand the monumental risks associated with unchecked currency debasement, and prepare your portfolio immediately before the irreversible cascade of Stage 4 completely and utterly wipes out the complacent majority.